Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. I'll introduce myself first. My name is Laurel, and I am a curator here at the University of Arkansas Museum. That's where we're at tonight. Typically, when we do these types of events where we feature a selection of materials, we've been doing them at the Student Union at the Arkansas Union on campus or at the Fayetteville Public Library. But obviously because of COVID, we're having to do things a little differently. So tonight I am going to share with you guys a selection of historical pharmaceuticals from the museum's collections. And yeah, we'll just go ahead and get started. So let me turn my camera around real quick. So I thought I'd start over here because I actually pulled a selection we're going to look at in particular, but this is actually the cabinet where most all of our historical pharmaceuticals and medicine and medical equipment lives, pretty much all in one cabinet, and it's all kind of divided by size and types of materials. So a lot of these boxes up here, these are different types of pharmaceuticals, and we have some different doctor's bags, saddle bags, medical equipment, things like that. We also have some veterinary equipment as well. And then we have all these little drawers with more pharmaceuticals and equipment. And like I said, it's all kind of divided by function and type. I have some scary looking medical equipment here. Yeah, I got some saws. Oof. Most of our equipment dates from either the mid 1800s to the mid 1900s in general. Some of these are just tools. They're kind of, we found a space for them in here because they fit. Some of them actually, those aren't actually, yeah, these are actually wood carving things, I think. We have one more drawer of medical stuff. Yeah, down here, lots of materials down here. We got a scale, some other little surgical kits and other types of kits. That's very nice. But I went through and I pulled a selection for us to look at in particular tonight. So we're going to head over and look at those. Close up the doors. Walking along. This is where all of our collections are housed. From history to, looks a little creepy right now, great for Halloween, all the lights are out, but it's where our zoology collection, our geology, everything is housed in here. So this is what I pulled to share with you guys tonight. So like I mentioned, a lot of our pharmaceuticals, they date between mid 1800s to mid 1900s. And it's an interesting time period from what I've been looking at. There was a boom in pharmaceuticals, especially in the late 1800s, early 1900s. For a few reasons there. For one of them, the Industrial Revolution increased manufacturing. It led to more urban living, so more access to these pharmaceuticals. There's a rise in newspapers. So in 1800, there were approximately 200 newspapers in the US, and by 1900, there were over 20,000. So there's a lot more newspapers around. There was a rise in literacy. There was a rise in technology for print and for paper making. And printing then led to the domino effect. That led to more advertising, which meant a lot of these pharmaceuticals got a lot more advertising out there. It's got the word out there more. They didn't use just newspapers, though. They used magazines, trading cards for different products were a big thing at that point, big collector's item in the Victorian era. Giveaways, they gave away like almanacs, posters, all kinds of stuff like that. Pharmaceuticals, they had some pretty aggressive campaigns sometimes, and they relied on colorful packaging, kind of sometimes exotic looking, or just interesting illustrations to grab the eye. This is one of my favorites. It's very pretty. And let's see. There was also a rise in drugstores, so, or at least the idea of that we know of the drugstore today. Like Walgreens, for instance, they first established in 1901. But this idea of, being able to go in and pick up a prescription or medicine, over-the-counter medicine, as well as pick up other kind of necessities, or even just nice to have things like candy or a card or whatever, that was starting to form at this point. And probably the biggest influence with this boom of pharmaceuticals was almost a complete lack of regulation. There's a big lack of regulation in terms of, like, you didn't have to list any types of ingredients that are in the pharmaceuticals. You didn't have to list, at least not until 1906. There wasn't really any regulation in terms of how they are made, what they're made with, all that good stuff. And so some of these materials, I'm still not really sure what all is in them, and it might require doing a chemical analysis, but I'm sure there's some really, really fun ingredients in some of these. So basically, this lack of regulation and this increase in the ability to have these pharmaceuticals, it led to something called patent medicines, commonly referred to as patent medicines. And this idea goes back to England with like officially patenting a medicine through the English crown. But more often than not, these things weren't actually patented over in the US. It made them sound very official, but they were kind of made from a lot of different things. And I don't want to sound like nothing positive came from this era in medicine, because I'll show you a little later some things that did come from this era and are still around today. But more often than not, there are a lot of medications out there that either it was false advertising, they didn't actually do what they were supposed to do, because they didn't have anything in them that actually could do anything. Or they did temporarily help their patients in a way, but it was because they had alcohol or opium or morphine or all that good stuff in it. And so it temporarily alleviated their problems for a while, but not because the medicine had really legitimate things in there to help them necessarily. And then on the other side of the scale there, from ineffective to, there were some that were found to have things like mercury and lead and arsenic in it and things like that. So they could be anywhere from ineffective to sort of effective to not very harmful. So I've pulled some to share with you guys that I know some about the ingredients. Others, they don't really list anything, and that goes back to not having regulations. They just didn't list their ingredients anywhere. So if you'll give me 1 second, I need to go grab some gloves. I'll be right back. We wear gloves around the collections a lot to protect the materials, but especially working with these pharmaceutical collections, where we don't really know necessarily what all is in them. That's just wear gloves as much as possible. So let's see here. So we have here, it's called Schneck's Mandrake pills. And these were produced, these in particular were produced sometime in the 1860s or later, because I know that because I found out that they didn't start sugar coating. Apparently they did not taste very good originally. They started sugar coating them in the 1860s, and these are sugar coated. So no, they're at least after the 1860s. From what I can tell, there's no mandrake actually involved with these, but there are laxative components, and it in particular is mainly supposed to be for constipation. And actually all of these right here, their main function is supposed to be for constipation. A lot of the ones I pulled didn't necessarily mean this, but a lot of them ended up being mainly for constipation and stomach problems. Let's see here. This one is, oh, another thing to mention about this one. This one is also interesting because I found a booklet they put out a long time ago by the company on this product, and it had, it listed beyond constipation, curing constipation, it also listed like 40 to 50 other potential remedies this could be for. So these patent medicines are often advertised as being kind of cure-alls or miracle cures, which sounds vaguely similar to some of the products you still see today, like in infomercials or dietary supplements, that they just seem too good to be true in what they offer, right? So that in some ways, these things haven't really changed that much. But going back to this one, so this is called Beechams patent pills. These originally came from England, and then they made their way over to the US. They also are for constipation. It's a very interesting little design. Again, they try to be colorful and have interesting graphics on them. Oops. I don't know what is in this. And like I mentioned, this would be before the 1906 Pure Food and Drug Act, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But they weren't required to put any ingredients on it, so there's nothing on here that describes that. There's also Bishop's pills. Bishop's pills. Oh, yes, this is what I was mentioning. I'm sorry. So something else to mention about Beecham's pills is that this is also a mild laxative. So this had laxative properties. This does as well. It essentially was soap, ginger, and aloe, and the soap would have been the laxative. So, and then this one induced vomiting. So this is just a great trio right here. But the Bishop's pills in particular, this one actually does list ingredients. So this means this would have been produced later when they were required to do that. Basically, it has calomel, which induces vomiting, has belladonna, which is a very, very toxic plant, and some other toxic ingredients on here as well that it might have kind of purged your system, but it wouldn't necessarily help you long term. So these kind of all produce some interesting results. More constipation down here. I'm sure this is what you guys are tuning in to hear about, is constipation tonight. But these are Hot Springs liver buttons. These actually were produced in Hot Springs, Arkansas by the Hot Springs Chemical Company. And this also is a laxative. It's supposed to help with constipation, indigestion, for that tired feeling. And I think I saw some other things it was advertised to do as well. Like they start with kind of that main thing it's supposed to help with, and then they push in a bunch of other little potential things that could potentially help with. Busy Bee capsules. This is just an interesting little design on here, I thought. These are from Oklahoma City for 25 cents. directions for it. Oops. Again, for constipation, indigestion, stomach troubles. But then it's also, like I said, they put in a bunch of other potential cures for you. Headache, dizziness, heartburn, sour stomach, summer diarrhea. Tell your friends. And then these other three over here that I just thought were interesting to pull. This is a very brightly colored one here. O'Neill's Vegetable Remedy. Vegetable remedy, vegetable compounds were frequent names in the game. Here's Raymond's liver pills. Liver pills also pop up a lot in our collections, similar to liver buttons. And then Mother's Pioneer pills. These also are for liver complaints, stomach complaints. Pleasant and effective. I find that interesting wording. Pleasant and effective pop up a lot in on these containers, or similar words to that. This medicine is pleasant and effective. So, but as I've alluded to, things began to change in 1906 for a few reasons. One of them, medical professionals, medical societies started realizing that some of these medications that were being put out, they shouldn't be put out. They weren't effective. They're discouraging patients from using actually effective treatment. There was also the temperance movement. So national prohibition would happen in 1920, and a lot of this, well, not necessarily a lot, but quite a bit of this types of medication included hefty alcohol content to them. So they didn't like these medicines being put out. And then there are also investigative journalists at the time. So for instance, Upton Sinclair's famous The Jungle about the meatpacking industry in Chicago came out in 1906, the same year as the Pure Food and Drug Act. And so they all these groups kind of work towards this goal to have more regulation with medication. And that's what happened in 1906 with this, with the FDA Act. It was a start. It didn't solve all the problems, but it was a start. It led to companies, manufacturers being required to post any sort of, a certain number of substances such as addictive substances such as opium or morphine. You had to list if you had alcohol. And so here's a few examples of ones that I found where you can obviously tell that it was made after 1906, after this act was passed, because they started listing these ingredients, or because I found later on they were called out by the FDA for misbranding and false advertising. So we'll go through a few of these. This one is the most obvious here. So Asketo, that's a hard one to say, especially at the end of a Monday. This is a trial size. It's supposed to help with, I believe this is supposed to help with the respiratory issues is what I had read. And it is listed as having 13% alcohol, opium, as well as arsenic acid in it. And so this obviously was produced after 1906 because they were required to list these types of ingredients on there. Also have Blackburn's Casca Royal pills. These in particular, I did see that these were called out for misadvertising, that what they were, so this is supposed to be for, unsurprisingly, for constipation, for relieving constipation, that they were called out for false advertising, I think in the 20s. And basically what their pills weren't doing what it was supposedly supposed to do. But what's also interesting about it is they are called out a second time earlier on, because they originally were called Blackburn's castor oil pills, but an analysis was done on them and was found like virtually no castor oil at all in the pills. And so they were forced to change their name because, again, it was false advertising. That's a very pretty box, right? A lot of them have this this doctor who is their kind of their mascot, the portrait of them. This is Blackburn, I suppose. Guaranteed to effectively relieve constipation or money back. Again, it's a laxative. Then going to the prunoids, this was another one where there's very little prunes in this. It's a laxative. It's again for stomach issues. It's a very pretty box. This one was another one that's called out for false advertising in terms of what it had in its ingredients. Let's see here. This is one that was produced before it was called out for false advertising, which it was. But I know that because it says is guaranteed under the, you can see if I can get it in there without it blurring. It says guaranteed under the Food and Drug Act, 1906. But that one, that's a one way, like if you guys are collectors of, if you go, so you can find some of these things in old antique shops, I suppose. So if you're collectors of this kind of stuff and you're trying to figure out dates, obviously you want to be careful with these things, but that's one way to kind of tell a date wise is if it has this guaranteed under the Food and Drug Act, it very likely was produced after 1906 because they were required to put that on there, as well as they're, like I said, required to put ingredients. This here, Vapo Presolene, this was very popular from the 1880s up until the 1950s, which is amazing because by 1908, the American Medical Association was already calling this product a sham and that it pretty much was ineffective. Basically, it's supposed to help with respiratory issues. You're supposed to inhale it, but it was ineffective at best, and without proper ventilation, it actually could be harmful. And so this was actually called out pretty early on, but they campaigned for it very aggressively. And I mean, by 1933, the FDA put out, what is it called? The National Hall of Horrors or something like that. Basically, they had a traveling exhibit with 100 products that were deemed dangerous or had false advertising and things like that. And this is one of them that was on that list. But it managed to still be in use up until the 1950s. So it lasted quite a while. Then this one, this is really interesting here. This is Raleigh's Liniment. And this company came around in the 1800s, and it actually is still around today. And so I'm sure in quite a different form than what they're producing at this point. But basically, this has 48% alcohol, and it could be used internally for colds, as well as to relieve cramps due to gas. It could be used externally as well for muscle aches and pains, for stiffness, for strains and bruises, for fatigue, for stings and bites, all kinds of things. But it could also be used for your cattle, for your livestock. So it's like a 2-in-1. This is just really great to me. But yeah, this is a great example of what I was mentioning earlier about high alcohol content and how the temperance movement did not like that. Quite a bit in this one. But that one is another one that was called out by the FDA or like the American Medical Association, one or the other. This is the last one I wanted to share. It was this advertising. It's Stella Vitae, Star of Life. It's Women's Relief Mother's Cordial. It's supposed to help with menstrual irregularities. And I'm kind of surprised that they even list the word menstrual on there, because early on they kind of hinted at things related to women's issues like menstruation and such. They didn't really include that on the box, so this is a little more straightforward than some of them. But this one was called out for misadvertising. It has 10% alcohol. I think quite a bit of, what did I see? It had quite a bit of extra sugar added to it. So it really didn't do much for anybody. We positively guarantee that this contains no opium. So this would have been after 1906 because it mentions how it doesn't have any opium or other narcotic drugs in it, basically. All right. And here's just another example of a medication that was produced after 1906, because it says guaranteed under the Food and Drug Act, June 30th, 1906. But with 1906, this didn't solve all these issues. It just made manufacturers, required them to list kind of addictive substances and such. But it wouldn't be until 1938 that companies were required to list all ingredients of their products. And continually things have been updated through the years. I think it was in 2002 that the FDA created the category dietary supplements that basically say that they have not been analyzed by the FDA. So, I mean, it's something it's just a continually evolving field. But yeah, those are just some of the earlier ones. Silver nitrate, I wanted to pull this one here. So this was used, so you were supposed to actually take this orally to induce vomiting, but it's no longer, you're no longer supposed to orally take silver nitrate. I think it's used for like burns and such topically, but not orally any longer. It is poisonous. So, yep. There's nothing in it though. So a lot of these things that I'm picking up and looking at, there's nothing in them anymore. It's just their containers. All right. So, moving on. So I just spent a lot of time talking about how all these patent medicines that misadvertise and have really strange ingredients in them, but there are actually a lot of medical advances happening as well at the same time that would eventually kind of help get rid of some of these issues with lack of regulation. For instance, the germ theory of disease was coming around in the 1800s. This spurred things like antiseptics and sanitation, so you know, to help with infections. So this here, this was advertised as the very first antiseptic surgical ointment, and it's actually still around today, but it came around in the 1890s originally. It's the first thought in burns. Indicated in burns, scalds, cuts, bruises, ulcers, bed sores, tumors, eczema. Strictly antiseptic, it relieves pain. So this is an example of a product that's still around today. There's also the very first clinical thermometer that was produced in 1870. Let me see if I can get this open. the very first clinical thermometer in 1837, which standardized testing and helped in the development of anti-fever drugs. Development for vaccines were on the rise. I went through and found a list of a lot of vaccines, and I mean, let's see, anthrax, first vaccine for anthrax was 1881, 1896 was typhoid fever, 1897, bubonic plague, 1926, whooping cough. The list goes on of a lot of different vaccines that were coming up with all of these new medical advances. And so we have in our collections, smallpox vaccine. It's just an empty container. There's nothing inside it anymore. Let me get this so you can actually read it. There's an expiration date of 1970 on it. But yeah, smallpox in particular, there's an intense campaign to eradicate it starting in the 60s, and it was officially eradicated in 1980 worldwide. So there hasn't been any more natural cases since then. Malaria. So malaria, we have a couple products here related to that. This is one of my favorites. It's just such a bright one, and the baby is so weird. But it's called Grove's Tasteless Chill Tonic, and it's a very common treatment for malaria for a long time. Malaria was used, it had quinine in it, and that was used from the 1600s up until approximately the 1920s, when newer, more effective treatments came around. But it's still a treatment today. It's just not necessarily the first option anymore. Okay, so now the rest of them that I wanted to share with you, they're kind of what I alluded to earlier. These products, these medicines that came around about the same time, but they've lasted all these years and they're still effective today. Or they might have kind of changed their form since then. Hint, hint, CocaCola, but they started out around the same time, late 1800s, early 1900s, and they've lasted since then. So this one in particular, let me show you this one. This is a Vix Drops bottle. It's very cute, so little. So Vicks, as in Vicks Vapor Rub, which Vapor Rub in particular from Vicks was invented in 1894. It was renamed Vicks Vapor Rub, like it got its actual name in 1911 though. This in particular, this is not for a vapor rub though. This is for nose drops, for like congestion likely. And this was introduced, from what I read online, 1931. So, yeah. But then also we have Vaseline. So Vaseline was first discovered by Robert Augustus Chesebro, chemist from New York, who discovered petroleum jelly. And then he actually branded it in 1970 as Vaseline petroleum jelly. And approximately in 1875, Americans were buying 1 jar per minute of this stuff. So it's very popular. You can see it has an ingredient here. And then aspirin, which is so widely known and used. Aspirin came around again in the late 1800s. These are dated much later than that, but it was first produced by Bayer, and now it's produced by a lot of people. But aspirin actually, it goes back to using willow bark for pain relief, which has been used as a source for pain relief for at least 4,000 years in a lot of places around the world. And then an extract from willow bark, in particular, that helps that, it actually caused gastrointestinal irritation for some. And so aspirin really took off as it did most recently because His name is Felix Hoffman. He basically altered the acid within willow bark that does the job so that it doesn't cause this irritant in digestion and stuff. And that's kind of what cleared it to become so widely used and known. This is actually from Montgomery Ward's. Fields. Raymond's tabs. Okay. And then, probably the most well-known of them all is CocaCola, which obviously is not a medication today, but when it was first produced and advertised, it was in a way. It was advertised as a brain tonic, as an intellectual drink. It's supposed to help with the nerves and things like that. And originally, so John Pemberton, actually, he was the one who originally created CocaCola in Atlanta, and one of his influences was a French drink made with cocaine and wine. But with the temperance movement, he ended up making it with just cocaine and cola nuts and something else. I forget it at the moment. It originally was produced with cocaine, and I'm sure it had some stimulating effects to it, but it does not anymore. Much later, they took it out. But these bottles in particular are from, they were donated by the Coca-Cola Bottling Company in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. So they not necessarily all of these were produced there, but in 1957, a curator here at the museum was doing an exhibit, and they requested from, this is Jackson, Tennessee, they requested any extra bottles the company might have that we could use. And so these were actually added to our collections from that company in particular that they had kind of collected themselves. This one in particular actually is from Pine Bluff, Arkansas. And from our records, these are estimated to date between 1907 to 1914. This one is from Greenville, Mississippi. Yeah. And then one final thing I wanted to share with you, let's see here, is this great product here, this Lyco, a splendid general tonic. Oh, that's the other word. They liked pleasant, effective, and splendid. That's how they like to describe a lot of their medicines. This tonic has 23% alcohol. It's used for general weakness, nervous, mental and physical exhaustion, loss of appetite, indigestion, overwork, worry. So quite a few things. But what I find interesting about it is, if you've seen the episode of I Love Lucy, where she's in that commercial for Vitamina Vegemin, the alcohol percentage for Vitamina Vegemin is also 23%. I thought that was quite funny. So, yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to share with you guys. Does anybody have any questions? I'll try to, let's see. Yeah, if you have any questions, leave them in the chat and I can try my best to answer them. You're welcome. Thanks, Mel. Well, no one has any questions. I guess that's all I have for you. Oh, I did talk about the tiny blue bottle, Mel. Yes. It is, it's a Vix Drops bottle. So it would have been for Vicks, as in Vicks Vapor Rub, for nose drops. And it likely dates sometime after 1931. Were those vaccines for medical use, or did people could buy them and apply them? I believe these are only for medical use. Some of these things that we've received, I believe they're kind of like supplementary supplies that were left over, or just kind of disposed at wherever they were, whatever pharmacy or drugstore they were located. So I don't think it was necessarily something where you could go in and buy the vaccine. It was definitely one where it was distributed. Are these from private collections or from archaeological sites? From my understanding, none of these are from archaeological sites. They are from, just collections from individuals who either like to collect them, or they were former doctors, or they somehow got a hold of, again, kind of like a bunch of extra pharmaceutical materials from a drugstore later on that I guess closed down, or whatever the case may be. They're from private collections. Other than the Coca-Cola bottles, which came from the Coca-Cola bottling company in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. So, yep. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this. Whether you're entertained or you learned something new, I find these quite interesting to look through and learn about all their strange ingredients, or their lack of advertised ingredients. But yeah, I guess this is goodbye for now. Next month we're hoping to do one on the swords in our collections. We have quite a significant collection of swords, so be on the lookout for that in November. You're welcome. Thank you for coming. I guess I always forget to turn my screen around, so we're just looking at the table. Thank you guys so much for coming tonight. Bye.